So one interesting sort of tangent I would love to take on this, because you mentioned this in the essay about nuclear, which was also, I mean, you don't shy away from a little bit of a spicy take. So Robert Oppenheimer famously said, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds," as he witnessed the first detonation of a nuclear weapon on July 16th, 1945. And you write an interesting historical perspective. Quote, "Recall that John von Neumann responded to Robert Oppenheimer's famous hand-wringing about the role of creating nuclear weapons, which, you note, helped end World War II and prevent World War III, with some people confess guilt to claim credit for the sin." And you also mentioned that Truman was harsher after meeting Oppenheimer. He said that, "Don't let that crybaby in here again."
Real quote, by the way, from Dean Acheson.
Oh boy!
Because Oppenheimer didn't just say the famous line.
Yeah,
he then spent years going around, basically moaning and going on TV and going into the White House and basically just doing this hair shirt thing, this sort of self-critical, like, oh my God, I can't believe how awful I am.
So he's he's widely considered, perhaps because of the hand-wringing, as the father of the atomic bomb.
Yeah. And this is von Neumann's criticism of him, is he tried to have his cake and eat it too. Like he wanted to, and von Neumann, of course, is a very different kind of personality, and he's just like, yeah, screw, this is like an incredibly useful thing. I'm glad we did it.
Yeah. Well, von Neumann is as widely credited as being one of the smartest humans of the 20th century. There's certain people, everybody says like, this is the smartest person I've ever met when they've met him. Anyway, that doesn't mean smart, doesn't mean wise. So I would love to sort of, can you make the case both for and against the critique of Oppenheimer here? Because we're talking about nuclear weapons. Boy, do they seem dangerous.
Well, so the critique goes deeper, and I left this out. Here's the real substance. I left it out because I didn't want to dwell on nukes in my AI paper. But here's the deeper thing that happened. And I'm really curious, this movie coming out this summer, I'm really curious to see how far he pushes this, because this is the real drama in the story, which is it wasn't just a question of are nukes good or bad. It was a question of should Russia also have them. And what actually happened was America invented the bomb. Russia got the bomb. They got the bomb through espionage. They got American scientists and foreign scientists working on the American project. Some combination of the two basically gave the Russians the designs for the bomb, and that's how the Russians got the bomb. There's this dispute to this day of Oppenheimer's role in that. If you read all the histories, the kind of composite picture, and by the way, we now know a lot actually about Soviet espionage in that era, because there's been all this declassified material in the last 20 years that actually shows a lot of very interesting things. But if you kind of read all the histories, what you kind of get is Oppenheimer himself probably he probably did not hand over the nuclear secrets himself. However, he was close to many people who did, including family members. And there were other members of the Manhattan Project who were Russian Soviet assets and did hand over the bomb. And so the view that Oppenheimer and people like him had, that this thing is awful and terrible and oh my God, and all this stuff, you could argue fed into this ethos at the time that resulted in people thinking that the Baptists thinking that the only principal thing to do is to give the Russians the bomb. And so the moral beliefs on this thing and the public discussion and the role that the inventors of this technology play, this is the point of this book, when they kind of take on this sort of public intellectual moral kind of thing, it can have real consequences, right? Because we live in a very different world today because Russia got the bomb than we would have lived in had they not gotten the bomb. Right, the entire 20th century, second half of the 20th century would have played out very different had those people not given Russia the bomb. And so the stakes were very high then. The good news today is nobody's sitting here today, I don't think, worrying about like an analogous situation with respect to, like, I'm not really worried that Sam Altman's going to decide to give, the Chinese the design for AI, although he did just speak at a Chinese conference, which is interesting. But however, I don't think that's what's at play here. Mm-hmm. But what's at play here are all these other fundamental issues around what do we believe about this, and then what laws and regulations and restrictions are we going to put on it, and that's where I draw like a direct straight line. And anyway, and my reading of the history on nukes is like the people who were doing the full hair shirt public, this is awful, this is terrible, actually had like catastrophically bad results from taking those views. And that's what I'm worried is going to happen again.
But is there a case to be made that you really need to wake the public up to the dangers of nuclear weapons when they were first dropped? Like really, like educate them on like, this is extremely dangerous and destructive weapon.
I think the education kind of happened quick and early. Like,
how?
It was pretty obvious.
How?
We dropped one bomb and destroyed an entire city.
Yeah, so 80,000 people dead.
Yeah.
Uh,
And look, the nukes.
but I don't like the reporting of that. You can report that in all kinds of ways. Wars, you can do all kinds of slants, like war is horrible, war is terrible. You can make it seem like the use of nuclear weapons is just a part of war and all that kind of stuff. Something about the reporting and the discussion of nuclear weapons resulted in us being terrified, in awe of the power of nuclear weapons, and that potentially fed in a positive way towards the game theory of mutually assured destruction.
Well, so this gets to what actually happened. Let's get to what actually
happened. Some of it's
happened.
me playing devil's advocate here.
Yeah, sure, of course. Let's get to what actually happened and then kind of back into that.
Yeah.
So what actually happened, I believe, and again, I think this is a reasonable reading of history, is what actually happened was nukes then prevented World War III. And they prevented World War III through the game theory of mutually assured destruction. Had nukes not existed, right, there would have been no reason why the Cold War did not go hot, right? And then and the military planners at the time, right, thought on both sides thought that there was going to be World War III on the plains of Europe, and they thought there was going to be like 100 million people dead, right? It was like the most obvious thing in the world to happen, right? And it's the dog that didn't bark, right? Like it may be like the best single net thing that happened in the entire 20th century is that like that didn't happen.
Yeah, actually, just on that point, you say a lot of really brilliant things. It hit me just as you were saying it. I don't know why it hit me for the first time, but we got 2 wars in a span of like 20 years. Like we could have kept getting more and more world wars, and more ruthless. You could have had a U.S. versus Russia war.
You could have. By the way, there's another hypothetical scenario. The other hypothetical scenario is the Americans got the bomb, the Russians didn't, right? And then America's the big dog, and then maybe America would have had the capability to actually roll back the Iron Curtain. Yeah. I don't know whether that would have happened, but like it's entirely possible, right? And the act of these people who had these moral positions about, because they could forecast, they could model, they could forecast the future of how this technology would get used, made a horrific mistake because they basically ensured that the Iron Curtain would continue for 50 years longer than it would have otherwise. Like, and again, like these are counterfactuals. I don't know that that's what would have happened, but like the decision to hand the bomb over was a big decision made by people who were very full of themselves.
Yeah, but so me as a person that loves America, I also wonder if U.S. was the only ones with the nuclear weapons.
That was the argument for handing the guys who handed over the bomb. That was actually their moral argument.
Yeah, I would probably not hand it over to. I would be careful about the regimes you hand it over to. Maybe give it to like the British or something, or like a democratically elected government.
Well, look, there are people to this day who think that those Soviet spies did the right thing because they created a balance of terror as opposed to the U.S. having just. And by the way, let me
balance of terror.
Let's tell the full version.
Has such a sexy ring to it.
Okay, so the full version of the story is John von Neumann's a hero of both yours and mine. The full version of the story is he advocated for a first strike. So when the U.S. had the bomb and Russia did not, he said we need to strike them right now.
Strike Russia.
Yeah. Yes.
Von Neumann.
Yes. Because he said World War III is inevitable. He was very hardcore. His theory was World War III is inevitable. We're definitely going to have World War III. The only way to stop World War III is we have to take them out right now, and we have to take them out right now before they get the bomb because this is our last chance. Now, again, like,
is this an example of philosophers in politics?
I don't know if that's in there or not, but this is in the standard.
No, but meaning
that this is on the other side. So most of the case studies in books like this are the crazy people on the left.
Yeah.
Von Neumann is a story, arguably, of the crazy people on the right.
Stick to computing, John.
Well, this is the thing, and this is the general principle. It goes back to our core thing, which is like, I don't know whether any of these people should be making any of these calls.
Yeah,
because there's nothing in either von Neumann's background or Oppenheimer's background or any of these people's background that qualifies them as moral authorities.
Yeah. Well, this actually brings up the point of in AI, who are the good people to reason about the morality, the ethics, outside of these risks, outside of like the more complicated stuff that you agree on is, this will go into the hands of bad guys, and all the kinds of ways they'll do is interesting and dangerous, is dangerous in interesting, unpredictable ways. And who is the right person? Who are the right kinds of people to make decisions how to respond to it? Is it tech people?
So the history of these fields, this is what he talks about in the book. The history of these fields is that the competence and capability and intelligence and training and accomplishments of senior scientists and technologists working on a technology, and then being able to then make moral judgments in the use of the technology, that track record is terrible. that track record is like catastrophically bad.
The people, just to linger, the people that develop that technology are usually not going to be the right people.
Well, why would they? So the claim is, of course, they're the knowledgeable ones, but the problem is they've spent their entire life in a lab, right? They're not theologians. But so what you find when you read this, when you look at these histories, what you find is they generally are very thinly informed on history, on sociology, on theology, on morality, on ethics. They tend to manufacture their own worldviews from scratch. They tend to be very sort of thin. They're not remotely the arguments that you would be having if you got like a group of highly qualified theologians or philosophers, or
well, let me sort of, as the devil's advocate takes a sip of whiskey, say that I agree with that, but also it seems like the people who are doing kind of the ethics departments in these tech companies go sometimes the other way.
Yes.
They're not nuanced on history or theology or this kind of stuff. It almost becomes a kind of outraged activism towards directions that don't seem to be grounded in history and humility and nuance. It's again drenched with arrogance. So definitely, I'm not sure which is worse.
Well, no, they're both bad. So definitely not them either.
I guess.
Well, look, this is a hard.
Yeah, it's a hard problem.
This is a hard problem, and this goes back to where we started, which is okay. Who has the truth? And it's like, well, like how do societies arrive at like truth, and how do we figure these things out? And like our elected leaders play some role in it. We all play some role in it. There have to be some set of public intellectuals at some point that bring, rationality and judgment and humility to it.
Yeah.
Those people are few and far between. We should probably prize them very highly.
Yeah, celebrate humility in our public leaders.